everyone, I'm Sara and welcome back to my crochet channel. Now today's video I'm going to be showing you how to crochet our new Briar Rose shawl. Now a few years ago I designed a simple granny square style Briar Rose shawl. We decided to update the pattern with a new design. We decided to update the pattern with some new yarns and just make a brand new video for you. I had a lot of requests for it, and so we decided that fall, or this time of year, was a great time to update and refilm this video. Now you can find all the information about this shawl on my blog, and as always, I'll put that blog link down in the notes underneath this video. To make the Briar Rose new shawl, you're going to need about 4 ounces of any medium weight number 4 yarn. Now we're using acrylic because I think that works best for this project. And the yarn that I'm using is called Ferris wheel from Lion brand. Comes in a cake. I have it wound in a ball just to make it easier for me. It's a medium weight number 4 yarn. The name of this particular colorway is called Wild Violets, and I think it's perfect in its shades with greens and browns, pinks and purples, sort of a cranberry purple. I think it's perfect for this project. Now each cake has 3 ounces on it, so you'll have to get 2 cakes if you use the Ferris wheel. But again, you can use any medium weight number 4 yarn for this project. I suggest an acrylic or a blend, a wool blend or something like that. And I think that the cake yarns that have the colors that change are perfect for this project as well. Any of your Karen cakes or red heart cakes, shawl in a ball, any of those would work great for this project. And again, you're going to need about 4 ounces of yarn. Okay, so that's probably going to be about 400 maybe yards, not maybe a little less. And the thing about this project also is you can make it wider and longer by adding more rows. It's going to measure about 26 deep by about 48 wide if you do it according to my pattern. If you want it to be bigger, you want it to wrap farther around your shoulders, or you're making it maybe for a taller person or larger person, you can continue to add as many rows as needed and then add the trim. And I'll talk more about that when we get farther on in the video. We're going to be stitching with our eye hook, which is a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. You'll need a needle just for weaving in ends and attaching your flower, because we do need to make a briar rose. And you'll need a pair of scissors. We're going to begin with our slip knot, and then we're going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to join this chain 5 into a circle, so we'll put the tail of our yarn over our hook and pull that through. Now we'll just snug that down and tie that stay knot. We're going to go in, pull up a loop, and chain 3. 1, 2, and 3. This chain 3 counts as 1 double crochet. We're going to stitch 2 more, so we'll go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through the first 2, yarn over, and go through the second 2. And now we'll stitch another double crochet. We're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, and now we're going to stitch 3 more double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And now we'll go ahead and chain 3. And this is the top of our shawl. And we'll be working our V down this way, and our shawl will get wider and longer. And so for row 1, we have 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. All right, let's do row 2. We're going to begin with a chain 3, counts as our first double crochet, and we're going to turn our work. We're going to stitch 2 double crochets in this first double crochet. So we chained 3 and we stitched 2 double crochets in our first stitch. We're going to chain 2, and now we're going to move down to our chain 2 space, and we're going to stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. We're going to chain 2 and stitch 3 more double crochets in this chain 2 space. Now we'll chain 2 and we'll skip those 2 double crochets and go up to our last double crochet, and we'll stitch 3 double crochets in this last stitch. 1, 2, and 3. And so for row 2, we have 3 double crochets, chain 2, and then we have 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets in our chain 2 space, and that's our point of our shawl. Then we chain 2, and we have 3 double crochets in that stitch there. And so we increased by 6, 3 on each side, and then stitched the center the same. And that's the way that row 2 should look. For row 3, we're again going to chain 3. We're going to turn our work and stitch 2 double crochets in that first stitch. And chain 2. Now we'll come to this next chain 2 space and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. We'll chain 2. We've chained 2, and now we'll come to the chain 2 in the center of our shawl, and we'll stitch those 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. Chain 2. Now this brings us to our next chain 2 space, and we'll stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Then we'll chain 2, and we'll come to our last double crochet of our 3 together there, of our 3 cluster. So we'll go in that last stitch and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And so now for row 3, we have 3 double crochet cluster, chain 2, 3 double crochet cluster in our chain 2 space, chain 2, and that brings us to our point where we have 3, chain 2, and 3, which is 2 clusters. Then we have our chain 2, 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. So now we have 1, 2, 3 clusters and 1, 2, 3 clusters. So now we're ready for row 4. So again, we're going to chain 3. We're going to turn our work and stitch 2 double crochets in the same stitch as our chain 3, which is the first stitch. Chain 2. We'll go to our next or first chain 2 space and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And again, we'll chain 2 and 3 double crochets in our next chain 2 space. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 2, which brings us to the point of our shawl. And we'll go in that chain 2 space and stitch 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. Chain 2, and again we'll stitch 3 double crochets in our chain 2 spaces with chain 2s in between. Then, oops, almost lost my loop there. Chain 2, and then in the last stitch we're going to stitch those 3 double crochets. Oops, missed my stitch. I'm going to make sure we go in the stitch and not the hole, or it leaves a little gaping hole in there and we don't want that. 1, 2, and 3. So for row 4, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters. 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters on this side with our 3 chain 2 spaces, and then our chain 2 in the point, and 1, 2, 3 chain 2 spaces on that side. So basically what we're doing is every row we're increasing by a chain 2 space and a cluster at the beginning and end of each row. Right, let's do row 5. Chain 3, turn our work, 2 double crochets in the same stitch as our chain 3, which is our first stitch from that previous row, or our last stitch from the previous row, but our first stitch on this row. Chain 2, we go in each of the chain 2 spaces and stitch 3 double crochets, chain 2. Then that brings me to the point, or the chain 2 at the point of my shawl, and we stitch those 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. There's my chain 2, and now 3 more double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And then chain 2, and I'll work my way back up, stitching 3 double crochets, chain 2 in my chain 2 spaces. So I've placed a cluster or 3 double crochets, chain 2 in each of my chain 2 spaces. Here's my chain 2. And then of course in our last stitch, again, we're going to place 3 double crochets, or our granny square cluster. And again, a cluster is just 3 stitches together. All right. Now, you may notice that it gets a little ripply. Don't worry about that. It's going to lay out flat once we get it all trimmed up at the end. All right, so for row 5, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clusters with our chain 2s in between. All right, let's do row 6. So again, we're going to chain 3. We're going to turn our work and stitch 2 double crochets in that first stitch, 1 and 2. And then again, we're going to chain 2 and work our way down to that point, stitching 3 double crochets or a double crochet cluster in each of the chain 2 spaces with a chain 2 in between. Chain 2, and that brings me to the point or the center point of my shawl, and I'll stitch those 3 double crochets, 1, 2, and 3, chain 2, and then 3 double crochets or my double crochet cluster in that chain 2 space. And chain 2, and then I'll just work my way back up on this side, stitching the cluster or 3 double crochets, chain 2 in each of my chain 2 spaces. I worked my way up this side, stitching those 3 double crochets, chain 2 in each of my chain 2 spaces, and here's my end of this row, and so I'm going to stitch 3 double crochets in that last stitch. And so for row 6, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of our 3 double crochet clusters with our chain 2s in between. And that's row 6. What you're going to do is you're going to continue to repeat row 6. And basically what you'll do is you'll increase by 3 double crochets, chain 2 at the beginning and end of each row. And so each row you'll have that additional cluster, chain 2. Now if you do this pattern according to what I have written, you're going to get a shawl that's approximately, let me check my notes here, that's approximately 26 inches deep and 48 inches wide. And that's approximate depending on how tightly that you stitch. And so if that's not large enough, you can add as many rows as needed. And that's why I have my tape measure out here, because you want to measure as you go and make it the width and length that you need. Some ladies like a longer shawl and some like a shorter shawl. So it's kind of up to you. I prefer for this pattern a little bit shorter shawl, and that's why I did it at this measurement. That way I can take it with me to church or to the restaurant. When they've got their air conditioner blaring, I can put it on my shoulders. You're going to continue to repeat row 6, increasing at the beginning and end of each row for 29 or more rows. And again, measure as you go so it's the size that you need. So once your shawl is as big as you would like it, or you've done as many rows as you want, we're going to do a really fun and simple trim. Here is my last 3 double crochet clusters. I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn, or turn and chain 3, they're the same thing. And we're going to stitch 4 double crochets in this first stitch. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that gives us 5 double crochets in that first stitch. We're going to chain 1 and then single crochet in the next chain 1 space and then chain 1. Then we'll go to our next chain 2 space and stitch 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space and chain 1. And that's going to form a nice shell stitch across the bottom to the point and then up the other side of our shawl. All right, so I'm at my next chain 2 space and I'm going to stitch 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 2 space and chain 1 and repeat. 5 double crochets in the next chain 2 space. Isn't that pretty how that works out? All right, chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 2 space and chain 1. And I'll continue this down to where I get to my point of my shawl, and then I'll explain to you how to do that point. And it's really quite simple. So the repeat down to the point is 5 double crochets in the next chain 2 space, chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 2 space, and chain 1, and repeat. I've stitched my 5 double crochets, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1 all the way down to the point of my shawl. When you get down here, it does not matter if you end with a shell or if you end with a single crochet. You're just going to continue working around. If you ended like mine, I'm just going to go ahead and put 5 double crochets in the end or the point of my shawl. If I had my 5 double crochets at this chain 2 space, I would go ahead and put my single crochet there with my chain 1s before and after, and then do my shell or my 5 double crochets here. It's not going to matter. Sometimes when you add extra rows, it doesn't work out exactly the same, and it's okay. We're just moving around the edge of the shawl. And so when you're moving around the edge of the shawl and you come to the point, it does not matter if you have a single crochet here or the 5 double crochet cluster. It doesn't matter. It'll still move around smoothly and still look really pretty. All right, mine just happened to end up that way. And so now I'm just going to work my way back up, doing the same thing I did on this side with the 5 double crochets, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1, and repeat. So I worked all the way back the other side of my shawl so that I have shell stitches on both sides. Here's my last single crochet, chain 1, and now I'm going to stitch 5 double crochets in this last double crochet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now we're just going to chain 1. And so you'll end with 5 double crochets in that last stitch. And then we just chained 1 because we're going to stitch across the top of our shawl. We chained one, and now we're going to evenly single crochet across the top of our shawl. And so we'll just start right in that first double crochet that we stitched and stitch single crochets. Now, when you're stitching evenly, it's very difficult sometimes to know where to put your stitch. And so what I suggest is you stitch right in the sides of those stitches and not the holes. You need to watch and see to make sure you're not making gaping holes, but also that you're not pulling them in too tightly. You don't want your shawl to be all bunchy, but you also don't want great big gaping holes between. And so you need to try your best to stitch in the sides of those double crochets. There we go. Sometimes you got to kind of look for it like that. It just makes it much neater to do it that way. Now there might be a place where you can't find a stitch and you have to stitch in a hole. But try your best just to evenly single crochet and working in the sides of those double crochets so that it lays nice and pretty. I'm going to work this all the way across the top of our shawl, all the way over to this other end. All right, so we need some nice even single crochet stitches on the top of our shawl. I evenly single crocheted all the way across my shawl. I'm going to chain one, I'm going to turn my work, and now I'm just going to go back across, stitching a single crochet in each of those single crochets that we just stitched. And this is just going to make the top of our shawl nice and secure and to help it keep its shape. So, one single crochet in each of those single crochets that we evenly stitched across. And once we complete this, I'll come back and show you how to make the briar rose that goes on our shawl. I completed that second row of single crochet, and you can see how it makes a nice even row at the top of our shawl so that it helps it hold its shape. All right, so I'm going to cut my yarn. We're going to tie this off, and then we'll use our needle to weave in our ends, and we shouldn't have too many ends to weave in. We're going to begin with our slip knot, and we're going to chain 4. We're going to stitch 9 double crochets in the 4th chain from the hook. So we'll go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through the first 2, yarn over, and go through the second 2. Our chain 3 counts as 1, and we're stitching 9 additional double crochets in that same chain. So we have a total of 10 double crochets. Now don't panic if you have a little hole in the center, because we'll close that up with that tail of yarn. All right, let's see how many I've stitched. So chain 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we need one more, so we have a total of 10 double crochets. And again, our chain 3 counted as our first. Now we're going to join to that chain 3 and chain 2. Now we're going to be working in the front loops only, and then we'll come back and work in the back loops. So if you look at the top here, these front loops are the ones that are facing you. The back loops are the ones that are facing away. And for this first row, we're going to be stitching in the back loops only. So we're going to stitch 3 double crochets in this next front loop. 1, 2, 3. We're going to chain 2. We'll slip stitch in the next front loop and chain 2. Now we'll go to the next front loop and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. We'll chain 2, slip stitch in the next front loop and chain 2. We've made 2 petals. Now we'll go to the next front loop and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, slip stitch in the next front loop and chain 2. Then we'll go to the next front loop and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. Chain 2, slip stitch in the next front loop and chain 2. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 petals. And now we're going to stitch our last petal working in that front loop. Stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. We're going to chain 2 and then slip stitch in the next front loop. All right, so that's how the first row of our petals looks. You have 5 petals. Now we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to work in the back loop. So we're going to push our petals forward, and you can see this row here where we didn't stitch because those are the back loops. All right, so we're going to go right in that next loop. If we can see it. There it goes. All right. Chain 2, and this is going to be right behind that petal, and since that's right behind that petal where we did our chain 2, we're going to go in the next back loop and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. We're going to chain 2, slip stitch in this next back loop only, and chain 2. And this is important because that's going to stair step our petals, okay, so that the petal on the back loop is in between the petals from the front loop. All right, and if you push those petals forward, it's easier to find those back loops. All right, let's go to the next one and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 2, go to the next back loop and slip stitch and chain 2. Then we'll go to the next back loop and stitch 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 2, go to the next back loop, slip stitch, and chain 2. And see how that looks? It's double petaled. All right, and we'll just keep going. 3 double crochets in the next back loop. Chain 2, slip stitch and chain 2. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we have one more petal to do in the back loops. 1, 2, 3 double crochets, chain 2, and then we're going to push that forward, of course, and join, there it is, to that back loop. Okay, now I'm going to leave a little bit of yarn so I can sew it onto my shawl. You can take this and sew it on a safety pin if you want to, but it's a double layered little briar rose. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to close this hole first because I don't want a hole in the center. Now, if you want to, you could add a pretty little pin to the center or a pearl or something pretty to make your rose just a little more extra special if you want to. I like to attach these to my shawls and sweaters with a safety pin. That way I can take it on and off if it needs to be washed, and also I can trade it from shawls to sweaters. Okay, so this is our little double petaled, stuck on my finger, briar rose. So you can use the tail of yarn if you want to and sew it on to your shawl. You can put it anywhere you want to, or you can weave this end in. I'm just going to weave it in. This is just a little inexpensive brooch pin I've had for a while, and I can put this right in the center of my briar rose so that I can pin the two sides together, or I can just put it wherever I want and make it just a little bit extra fancy.